Hello and welcome back to another video. Today I'm doing the 40.9 supports tier list. So, if you enjoy content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There were a couple of changes this patch. Most notably, we saw buffs towards Annie, Ashe, Morgana, Leona, and Shen. In the case of most of these, they were kind of directed towards other roles. The Ashe buff was Q centric. It is a buff through 7 to 13. Doesn't really do a huge amount for support Ashe. In the case of Annie, she was underperforming in both mid and support, so they wanted to buff her up. She's not quite there as a support at the moment, but with the mage items changing in next patch, we can maybe see some sort of movement. The Morgana buffs were good. I believe this champion should be slightly over the bar, and now she kind of is. Leona's buffs were actually more of a mover than I thought they were in the going to be. What they ended up doing was more of the passive duration buff. I believe it was supposed to go from 1.5 to 2, but now it's 1.5 to 2.5 seconds, which is a good change. I think that's a really nice thing for a champion to receive. And then the mana costs and being able to rotate more combos in lane can be a very important thing. So Leona definitely doing a bit better with those changes. The Shen changes were really big. It really helped him in top, jungle, and support. If I'm like support, Shen is probably one of, if not just outright his strongest role at the moment, especially when you utilize him as a counter pick, which is where Shen should be utilized, as he's performing very well here with certain optimizations which can be done to really amplify his strengths in the role. Let's get into the tier list. So the D tier is going to lead off with MF. She is still heavily underperforming in the support role. She needs AP ratio buffs to kind of really fit in with the rest. I don't see that happening anytime soon, although it would be nice for if Riot embrace the fact that there are still MF support players out there. In case of Malphite, it's mostly a gimmick pick played alongside the likes of Yasuo, where you just utilize the power of this champion's ultimate to kind of look for cheese all-ins when accessible to. Obviously, you still have some level of harass with Q, and you can be a bit durable if you opt into some of that durability. Veigar sits within the D tier, similar to the likes of Malphite. He is mostly paired alongside the Ziggs, and he's just not great as a support option. You want to CS and stack with this pick, you want levels, and support is the worst role kind of accessible to get those things with out of his free played roles, so wouldn't recommend playing him here. In the case of Ashe, she's an incredibly elite skewed support, relying very heavily on lane dominance to kind of get value out of the pick. Debuffs 1 towards support Ashe. There's obviously some level of caution when support Ashe is mentioned, because this pick can dominate in competitive if given too much power. So Ashe going to remain as a D tier option at the moment, even with those buffs. Moving on to the C tier, then we're going to lead off with the re-addition of Gragas. He's still not popular by any means, and this is probably still one of his weaker roles. You're mostly going to use him as a flex, and then flex picks in solo queue just don't really matter as much. He is, one of the lower engaged support or heal options within the support role. Just a champion I wouldn't really recommend going to unless you're very comfortable on it and maybe even auto filled for the most part. Annie gets bumped up from the D tier to the C tier. She's not quite a B tier option in my opinion, although with some of the changes in the following patch, she might get the bump up. The buff towards Malignance for cost going down by 100 gold will definitely help her, especially if you opt into Malignance on this champion. So definitely something worth watching. She sits towards the high end of the C tier at the moment. I think you can play her in certain spots and get value out of the champion, but right now I'd still recommend some of the other picks over her, even with the buff she received this patch. Mel sits within the C tier. She's so close in so many roles to being a genuine, I would recommend this kind of a pick option. She's just not quite there at the moment. With the buffs kind of akin to Annie in the next patch for mages, I could definitely see her making that jump from the C tier to the B tier. But she's a bit too conditional at the moment, and she's not quite powerful enough to kind of compete with some of the B tier options. Amumu just lacks a good item. That is the main issue with this pick. If the item or even shroud still existed, Amumu support would be a genuine option. He's easy to play, it's great lockdown, and I think he pairs really nicely with something like an MF, which can be a really good option for him. Silas is a counter pick option, and honestly probably one of the higher C tier picks. He's actually not a bad support pick if you play him in the right spots. It's about getting the right spots, though. They're not that common, which is why he's lower down. But if you can find them, then I do think this pick can have value. And then Renata wraps up the C tier. His champion's in a really awkward spot at the moment. I think she probably needs some work done to her long term to kind of give her back some level of player base and make her a better option in solo queues. Right now, she's unpopular. She's not that great in solo queues. She's pretty gatekept by her pairings. And I think that's left her in a pretty rough spot. That being said, though, I think if you're comfortable playing Renata, and maybe you pair her with like certain champions which you know she can work well with, I think this pick can definitely go a bit up the tier list. I just don't think she's quite as good as some of the other options at the moment. Moving on to the B tier, then we're going to lead off with Nidalee, who this might bite me back later down the line, but I think she is an underrated champion in the support role. This pick has an incredible steroid on her E, giving a very hefty boost of attack speed alongside the heal, combined with the fact that she can be very abusive early on into the laning phase. And I think there is some level of optimization to be done there. I'm not a huge fan of the Grasp Roa build. I actually prefer Summon Airy alongside like a Moonstone, Echoes of Helia. I think if there is some level of like optimization, I do think this champion could actually probably even jump up to the A tier. She's obviously hard to play and probably not a pick I'd recommend, but I think she is kind of on that sleeper OP kind of side of things where if you put a lot of games into her, you could probably consider it like a really solid option within your pool. The big concern here is the fact that this pick might just die down. The pick rate might just like fade away, and Nidalee support might just become a thing of the past. So I would recommend trying it out, seeing if you're comfortable with it. If you're not, it's not a mandatory pick. I think she is just a solid option if you enjoy that kind of playstyle at the moment. Other picks within the B tier, lower down, include the likes of Hui, who probably needs a bit more to be like an actual AP support, like considerable option. I think he is just a good flex pick. Like if you are autofield support, you can play Hui support if you really want to. Blitzcrank is definitely one of the weaker hook picks. He is kind of kept that way because of his ban rate, and that's unfortunate, but I do think this champion in the right spots can definitely have value. He's not bad by any means. I just think that some of the other options more consistently outvalue him in more spots. Pyke is very hard to play. If you're very comfortable on Pyke, he can compete easily with the S tier options, but bad Pikes will definitely drag this champion down substantially. If you're not comfortable playing this pick, I'd recommend avoiding him. He can be a big LP sink, but if you're very comfortable on him, he's a great champion to play, especially when you are trying to climb through the ranks. Teemo sits within the B tier. He's a low B tier option. I genuinely think this champion's kind of underrated as a support pick. That being said, though, he's incredibly low elo skewed and requires like specific matchups and items to kind of like be there as a pick. So it drags him down definitely. Puts him as more like a low B tier option. But if you can get those spots kind of akin to like a Silas, for example, you can be a very valuable support option within the game. Tahm Kench's been overnerfed. He's just a B tier option. He's relatively easy to play, and I think that kind of sucks for the pick. He obviously caused a lot of frustration towards the end of last split. I kind of dislike the direction Riot have been taking with frustration points rather than trying to alleviate the frustration. It's just a nerf and try and forget about it approach, which I don't think is particularly good long term. But right now, yeah, sits as a lower end B tier option. The likes of Zac and Galio, I recommend over him. The problem is they don't have great items, which drags them down. They're just good flex picks. If you're comfortable playing them elsewhere, I think you can bring them into the support role and find success. Rakan is a very good elite and pro pick. He sees a lot of pro play and is oftentimes one of the like podium, I guess you could say, support options where people will usually lean towards Rakan in a lot of spots. He's not quite there for average play at the moment. I think he's a bit under the bar, but if you're very comfortable on him, I still think he's a great support option in a lot of spots. Yuumi is going to be nerfed again going in 14.10. They don't want Yuumi really to be above the line. I think that makes sense though. I think Yuumi does just end up breaking some level of the isn't healthy for the game. I just think as a champion she probably shouldn't have ever really existed. I think Riot have learned from their mistakes, fortunately, but she's going to be nerfed, probably sits towards the mid to low end of the B tier after those nerfs. Right now, though, I think she's still a high B tier pick. And if you pair her with like your traditional Smurf champions or like your hyper carry, she can be a very good support pick alongside those. So I don't think the champion's dead by any means, and I don't think she'll be dead next patch. I just think she'll be a slightly weaker option than some of the other picks, which I would recommend in like the A tier. Seraphine's fine. I think she pairs nicely alongside an Ashe, and Ashe being buffed does help her. but she's a bit below the bar, and if you pick her generally, she can definitely struggle, especially if you're not playing her with like some level of engage within the jungle. That can definitely cause this champion to struggle, as you are foregoing frontline when you opt into these enchanters a lot of times. LeBlanc sits within the B tier. She's a great Smurf snowball option, kind of akin to Zoe, where if you're very comfortable playing these picks, you can definitely forge advantages and be very powerful within the game, give these champions gold, and they snowball very aggressively. If you struggle on these picks, I would recommend avoiding them. They take a lot of time to like they're a big resource sink, and they're not the kind of picks where even after 20-30 games you can like guarantee getting wins on. So I'd avoid them for the moment. Swain, I think, is a fine beta option. He's always going to be mostly just like this mid to low elo skewed champion when played support. Is a bit resource heavy and requires certain compositions to be viable. But if you put him elsewhere and you like use him as a flex pick, I definitely think he sits as a pretty solid B tier option at the moment. Towards the high end of the B tier is Brand. This is the elo he's best in, and he's the B tier option. I think this champion's kind of weak at the moment. I mean, I think the champion just is weak at the moment. And yeah, it kind of leaves him in a pretty rough spot at the moment. He still works well in this elo, but I'd recommend moving on from Brand pretty quickly if you are going into the higher ranks. Dropping down from the A tier is Lux. I probably should have moved Lux down a while ago. This pick hasn't been that performant for a while. I've kind of been watching, but like hesitant, kind of akin to Zyra, who I've also dropped down from the S tier to the A tier this patch. Right now, she sits as a B tier option. I think if you're comfortable playing her, she's fine, but she's been on the downwards a bit, and hopefully with the mage option, she might find a place back in the B tier. But right now, yeah, sits as more the A tier, but right now she sits as more like a mid B tier option. Not a pick I really recommend. Also dropping down from the A tier to the B tier is Senna. She is being buffed in next patch, but right now she just sits a bit below the bar. She's pretty vulnerable to a lot of the champions in the game at the moment, being a very squishy marksman, and oftentimes not really providing as much as maybe she wants to within the game. If you're comfortable playing the champion, you'll continue to play her. If you're not, I wouldn't recommend her at the moment. But going into next patch, she probably becomes a solid option again. She's getting a bit of damage in trade for the AP ratio on the Q going, the AP heal ratio on the Q going down. So something to watch. Sits as like a high beta option at the moment though. Moving on to the A tier then, we have two champions which are being bumped up from the B tier to the A tier, and that is Morgana and Leona. In the case of Morgana, she sits as like a low A tier option. The buffs were nice, and I think she should be above the bar for like average play. She is a pretty... I mean, she's a frustration point for like average elos, but she does have a level of counterplay. She's a bit more conditional, and yeah, I think she's a pretty solid over the bar kind of champion. So she sits at A at the moment. The other champion which I'm moving up is Leona, who sits towards the high end of the A tier. Definitely really benefited from her changes, quality of life, and just strictly buffs. So yeah, very nice for Leona. Definitely one of the recommended kind of engage like support tank options which you can go to. I really like Leona as a pick. The lockdown which she provides is very powerful and can work really nicely into a lot of drafts. Karma sits in the A tier at the moment, more like a low A tier option. She's in an okay spot. She's above the bar primarily because of her enchanter build. The AP build just isn't quite there at the moment, but the buff towards malignance should definitely help here. So probably a champion worth watching. But right now, I'd say she sits as a low A tier option. She's above the bar, and I think she's good in a lot of situations, especially when paired with like champions which really benefit from the shielding and the movement speed she provides, but not quite good enough to compete with like some of the high A S tier options in her current state. Nautilus is the go-to hook champ for the most part. He obviously has incredible lockdown, a great long-range engage tool, and yeah, he provides incredibly powerful tools to most team compositions. The big concerns with Nautilus as a champion is oftentimes if you blind him, he can be counterpicked by the likes of Taric, Braum. These champions can be pretty big frustration points for Nautilus, and you can find if you're not that comfortable playing support, you just end up running it down with this champion. So there are like issues with the pick if you're like not that familiar with it, but if you are, then and you pick it in the right spots, I do think he's still one of the best support options you can go to. That being said, I think Alistar is also an incredible support option you can go to at the moment. Leona, Alistar, Nautilus are all the kind of like meta staples in their current forms. They all have very like solid tools and great value in most compositions. Either their lockdown, their engage, their durability just provides so much to like team comps, especially when you pair them with like a carry in the jungle. Elise is still a good support. Like, you can definitely get results on this champion. She's lost a lot of her popularity. Obviously, that was going to be the case when she got nerfed a considerably large amount of times, but I'd still have her on a tier above the likes of LeBlanc and Zoe in her current state. Pantheon is a great aggressive AD support. He's a bit easier than Pyke to play, and yeah, I'd recommend him if you're looking for something aggressive as an option which you can snowball early aggressive laning phases with. Nico is, I think I discussed with Staples on the in the comment section of the previous video about the strengths of Nico and why I have her as an A tier option. I still think she is a high A tier option. This pick can be a bit harder to play, and you do need to really dominate laning phase to get the most out of this champion, where her real strengths lie as a pick. But I do think if you are very, very comfortable on her, she is definitely one of the premier picks at the moment. Her damage, like in laning phase, and her engage tools combined with her vision scouting, all very, very valuable things on her kit. Bard sits in the A tier. He's a very, very solid champion, and if you're comfortable playing Bard, I would still recommend playing Bard. He's a bit harder to pick up than some of the other supports, as he's not that, I mean, he's like a non-traditional option, but pair him with the right things, aggressive lanes, and against compositions which don't have great tools to do with like the lockdown of his ultimate, I think you should have a great time playing this champion. Shaco is a bit more niche of an option, but still very, very solid in his current state. Definitely provides a lot of value with his boxes into certain compositions. Specifically being certain compositions, if you pick him in the wrong spots, he can definitely struggle, and you are giving up the slot of what might have been an engaged support, so you do have to make value of the traps and the damage this champion provides to like get value out of the pick. Zilean is great with certain champions. This pick really, really wants to play around the likes of your Hekarims, your Argots, and just those picks which really benefit from movement and speed. And just as a kit, he's really, really solid at the moment. I don't think he's quite an S tier option. You do need to put a lot of games into Zilean to really get the most out of the champion. But I do think he is a very, very solid A tier pick. He's just a bit niche of an option. Maokai is a very easy to play champion. Kind of sits with the other engage options. He's not quite as popularized in high elo and competitive. He's definitely a bit more low elo skewed, with a lot of his power kind of pushed towards the mid to late game these days. But the Trailblazer item is very strong on him. Trailblazer is kind of caught on as being a very good item. That's why the likes of Fiddlesticks is really popping up at the moment. And yeah, I'd say he's a very solid A tier pick in his current state. The two, I mean, actually, I'm gonna, because I dropped Zyra down, I'll actually put Zyra in the same place where I'd have put Lux. These are still my AP recommended damage options. I think Xerath is a very, very powerful pick if you are consistently rotating skill shots correctly. Vel'Koz has really good burst potential. I mean, Xerath does as well, but like I think Vel'Koz really, really shines when you pair him with a champion with good lockdown. Very solid pick in that regard. And Zyra, still a high-end A tier option, just was probably in need of being dropped down at some point. She wasn't quite competing up to the same standards as I would have said some of the S tier champions were at the time. The other picks within the A tier include the likes of Soraka. Really like her. She's a very traditional enchanter support, still performs very well. Obviously has the issue, which like most enchanters do, which she needs some level of engage in either top lane or in the jungle. And if you don't have that, then these picks can definitely struggle. I do think their numbers to an extent are compensated by that though. So if you put them in the right compositions, they are very, very powerful champions. So Soraka, yeah, definitely deserving of an A tier spot at the moment. Milio, I think, is to an extent slightly underrated. He's obviously a bit more conditional on what you can kind of pair him with, and he doesn't quite have the same level of mastery curve some of the other supports do, but in those spots I do think he can be a very powerful option. Some of the anti-engage picks are the likes of your Tareks and your Poppies. They're quite they're a bit more conditional, which is why they're not quite the premier like standout S tier options. Poppy was just blatantly overpowered not too long ago, which is why she was able to be in the S tier. But yeah, now that they're a bit more in line with some of the other options, I do just recommend them as counter picks, not blinding them, because you will definitely struggle into certain either enchanters or engage or just like compositions, which these picks can just be punished by. Dropping down from the S tier to the A tier is Fresh. He still sits towards the higher end of the A tier. He also kind of akin to Zyra just wasn't really competing with the S tier options, which is why I've chosen to drop him down. But I still think he's a great pick and definitely underrated compared to what these general stances of the champion. Also in the A tier now is, or was in the A tier, but now the high end of the A tier is Shen. I think Shen is an incredible option at the moment, especially in support. He's a bit too conditional to be an S tier option, but I think he is very, very close with just how strong the champion is and the fact that he's also a very powerful top laner. So Shen, definitely deserving of a high A tier spot. The buffs have put him in a very good spot for both support and top. I wouldn't be surprised if he got nerfed to maybe 14.11, so definitely play him in the spots where you can before he ends up being nerfed. That being said, though, Braum gets a bump up into the S tier. He is probably my favourite counter pick option in his current state. I think this champion just provides so much value, which is why he's in the S tier. I don't think he's blindable. I think he does get countered by enchanters, and when you're playing on a server like EU West, there are loads of people who just outright slam enchanters in a lot of games, so he can struggle a bit more on this server. But if you're maybe on one of the other servers, or you just pick him as like a direct counter to like the engage options like your Nautiluses and stuff, I think he's one of the best options in the game, and he has deserved himself a spot within the S tier, and probably should have had it a while ago as well. The other picks within the S tier include Sona. The buffs she received more recently were really good for her, and if you pick Sona in the right spot, I think she's one of the best options in the game. You have to pick in the right spot though. I think so many Sona players troll drafts by just being OTPs and always picking this champion, no matter the spot. Like, they'll pair alongside like Kaisers and Samuras and Dravens, and they just don't get the value out of the champion which maybe they want. And yeah, that can be an issue. But I do think this champion's numbers are just so high that she can sometimes even get away with it, so deserving of an S tier spot. The buffs were good though. I do think they were the right thing to kind of buff with the champion, because I think the champion probably can do with just being a bit over the line. Well, decent amount over the line, because that tends to be a spot where Sona can not be a particularly heavily banned champion, but feel good for the Sona players who are playing her. Lulu sits with the S tier. She's still a great enchanter option, and the nerfs in 14.10 will probably drop her down to the A tier finally. Her value as a kit is just so high, and I think the polymorph spell could have probably been the way they just nerfed her from the get-go. It is a big frustration point. Just having a point-and-click crowd control ability can feel very frustrating for a lot of champions to play against. She's still an S tier option though at the moment, and yeah, deservingly so. Janna and Nami are my other two enchanter options. Janna's a bit more conditional and can probably sit towards the lower end of the S tier. Nami's a bit more generalistic. I think Nami pairs just so nicely with so many of the champions in the game. She is probably the enchanter with the most like variety of options she can be played with, which is why I recommend her as like my premier S tier enchanter option. And yeah, the pick has so much value within its kit. Janna, yeah, wants to be used as a counter pick more often than not, but just also kind of akin to some of the other enchanters, has so much value within her kit that I just think she deserves a spot within the S tier. Ro is my premier engage option, though. I love Ro. I think this champion is just so valuable in so many different drafts. The power of her engage is just so strong, and it can set up so many different ways of playing the game. She can struggle into compositions kind of built to be anti-engage, but you won't see that level of drafting in solo queue, and I do just think that warrants a spot within the S tier. I honestly would be kind of sad to see her get nerfed, because I like seeing Ro. I think this champion is a cool, like, pick to have within the game, and she's not like breaking any popularity bars, where I think she's like number 5 or 6 for the most part, which is good, and I think it's a healthy spot. I don't know about her presence in competitive. That might be a concern, but yeah, I think this champion's just so valuable, pairs so nicely with like your MFs, your Samiras, and some like just generalistically the ADC pool. But I think she does also warrant a spot within the high end of the S tier. That being said, though, the S plus champion is still Fiddlesticks. He is being nerfed in 14.10 quite aggressively. I think he will probably land within the A, maybe even B tier, depending on just how hefty the nerfs end up swinging. It is obviously targeted towards his Trailblazer build. They are nerfing his Q fear duration, which is going to be meaningful for the role. But right now, he is the premier option in the support role. But if you're looking for other things and you don't really want to play Fiddlesticks, then yeah, your Rails, your Namis, I really like these picks. Lulu is still good at the moment. Braum's a great counter pick. Shen's a bit more unique, but also a great counter pick option. And yeah, like Sona is also a great enchanter option there for you. Those are my thoughts. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.